All right, I think I'm live. Let's move this here. Like that. There we go. That should be better. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Clockwork Game Dev Show. It is I, Keith Burgun. I think I'm live. Just getting some stuff going here. So today we're going to be talking about violence and non-violence in games. There's some questions from people. There was more in the chat too, but I'm having trouble finding them because we've had a bunch of conversations about violence recently in games. So there's another thing from Steven here I want to talk about. Oops, there we go. Okay, cool. We'll get to that. I have two major points that I want to make about violence before we get into the questions. Let's just write them down. Point number one. I'm not actually concerned about violence in games per se, as much as I'm concerned about I guess the political meaning of the violence. Yeah, I think that's an important development that has changed somewhat for me. I mean, I think that you still need to think about I guess another way to put it would be, let me see, another way to add to this would be to say, secondarily, or, I'm concerned with the political underpinnings of the violence, who's doing the violence, why, etc. What, mythologies or ideas are being reinforced through this violence. Yeah, so that's the first bit. I guess I would say point two. Portraying violence in games often can have a dehumanizing presentation. It's hard to get around. Most violent games don't, treat subjects of violence as human. I would say don't or can't. And regardless of the politics, there is something to be concerned about there. Right? So maybe I'll add some examples. Example. Let's see, cop game where you're arresting poor bad guys, or a colonization game that involves colonizing some, I don't know, just say some country. I'm not sure exactly how to put that, but yeah, something like that. Point number 2. So an example of this would be you know, like any war game. Really. War games take war and make it into something fun. It's hard to it's how do I word this? Like it would be like inappropriate to like make a war game where like you're actually sort of asked to think about the horrors of war. Yeah. Sort of downplaying the suffering and treating, you know, human life, I guess, like being frivolous with human life, as well as sending the message that war is fun. War killing is fun. Hey Jake, how's it going? Good to see you. How are you doing today? I got my favorite shirt on, by the way. This is my absolute favorite shirt I've ever owned. Look at it. It says having fun. And it's just got some people like having fun. Look at that. It's the best shirt of all time. Yeah. So yeah, these are my two main points. I think. Wait, is there another point? Oh yeah, another point. Another point is video games picked up the kids from school. How's school going? Or is school? So they're going into school, I guess. Actually, not just video games. Are like the sort of like fabric of the intellectual frameworks and traditions and culture in games is all like is very tied in with violence. Is all expressed, or like it's not all expressed, is spoken through a language of violence. I don't know how else to put it. Violence is the default, you know, like way that game interaction is thought to happen. And this is not just in video games, but it's also in tabletop and board games and stuff, obviously. War games being some of the top, the earliest, you know, tabletop games, as well as ancient abstracts, technically are war games. It's quite abstract, but still. And then you have like real war games, you have Dungeons and Dragons. They're all sort of through this language of not just violence, but also domination. Actually, we should put this something in this too here. Not just violence. Themes of like sort of domination, colonization, maybe like accumulation of resources. And that kind of goes into point 1 as well. Even sports were often training for a cultural substitute for war. Yeah, training for or a cultural substitute for war. That's a good point. Yeah, so earliest tabletop games, D&D, war games, you know, Space Invaders. I will quote you. That's well put. Yeah, and so it's interesting. Like, so then we have like these statements. So like I was saying, I guess now we can get into. These are, I think, the main things that I want to say about violence. I kind of want to make these like give these titles. Politics of violence, I guess. This one could be like, you know, like dehumanizing affect. And this one could be language of violence. Yeah, that looks good to me. Okay, so these are like my 3 main things that I want to think about. I have a thought. So something that is interesting is Eurogames, designer board games, which I always think of as like a big step forward in the history of games and game design. Completely, and this goes right to, it's funny, Marcus the Crouchmo just said, completely unconcerned about any of this. I just don't want all games to be the exact same game. Right, and that's like what I was just about to start saying was, and maybe this actually should be its own point. Number 4, like the stagnation, you know, or like creative stagnation. Because of, you know, the dominance of certain, you know, design patterns and etc. We'll just write for now. Like video games have failed to innovate as much as you might expect them to over the course of now 40 years. Oops. We're still kind of playing Space Invaders or Space War, right? I mean, like there was that like Doom Eternal or whatever that came out, and like that and Space War are so similar to each other. Every FPS and Space War, like you're doing the same things. And that actually brings me to my another point, which is like you know, I don't think it's a coincidence that some of the most innovative designs or like I guess have come out of, we'll just write that for now, have come out of which specifically I think it's just like for cultural reasons, practical reasons. I guess we could say cultural reasons. I don't know. Tried to avoid violent conflict. Someone said something in the Discord like, what's the difference between reducing someone's hit points to 0 by hitting them or reducing their spirit to 0 by breakdancing at them? Right. I think number 4 is my major concern as well, just like the artistic narrowness of what games can be. Yeah, and like I said, like, I mean, again, I'm not anti-violence because, you know, I think if you have a game where violence is being used to like counteract oppression or to decolonize, or I think that you know, I don't have a problem with that. I think you still got to think about stuff like this. And I think this is true not just in games, but in all media. I think you have to think about things like this. But yeah, 3 and 4 are really like, so we have this history of this language of violence, and it means that all of our games are kind of the same shit. We just never stop making the same thing over and over again. What's the difference between reducing someone's hit points to 0? Let's address that. Hit points to 0 by hitting them or reducing their spirit to 0 or by breakdancing at them. Right. So let's talk about that. Swapping, you know, like reskinning a violent game. Because that's basically what we're talking about, right? And, you know, something like Patch Quest comes to mind for me for that, where you're not shooting bullets at bad guys, you're shooting fruits at creatures and they eat the fruits and then they get happy. I think that's very interesting to think about. My first thought, my like gut feeling is that violence is not about bullets and people's flesh being seared and blood and gore and literal death. You know, I don't think that's actually what the essence of violence is. I think the essence of violence is, I mean, I think all those things are valid and important and they're part of violence, but I think that there's an essential quality of violence, and I think that actually actor removal has more to do with violence than like seeing blood fly out or something. So that's why the reskins don't really work. You know, like they don't really change that it's violence, because you're still forcibly putting something. So there's like, what is the essence of violence? I guess we could talk about, like, you know, I think I would grant that like the terrestrial or like the physical aspects of it is part of it. You know, part of it may be, you know, aesthetic, or what's the visceral, you know, blood and gore and representations of death. But a large part of it is sort of more mechanical. Acting on other agents. Because I think that, you know, in order for there to be violence, there have to be agents. There have to be like people or animals, you know, creatures on other creatures, we'll just say. Forcibly, right? So they don't there's something about that's that actually consent. The lack of consent is a major component here. Without consent, I think that's a big part of it. And I want to like asterisks put this in italics or something. And removing them from the space, right? So it's territorial. Violence is fundamentally territorial, right? Because you're taking someone who is here, you're making them be not here anymore, without their consent. And if you retheme that as like, no, it's hearts, and then I love you, and then you disappear still. So I think actually one of the best ways to make a game that's violent, not violent, is to have it be that they don't get removed. That's one way. Another thing is that they consent to whatever it is you're sending them. How can we make turn a violent game non-violent? Like how? So like let's take like Doom or something. I would say the fastest way to do that is to remove, obviously you can change the aesthetic qualities, art, sounds, etc. But even more important is that you remove actor removal and that you create a consent dynamic, i.e., or like you can't act on actors who don't want to be acted upon. And if you think about it, like that's very humanizing, right? Well, let me catch up on the chat a little bit. In the Water 88. Oh wait, okay, Hair Machine. One thing I think is kind of interesting is how some of these abstract mechanics, like hit points, are so grandfathered in almost as violent, but real violence is kind of nothing like that. Right, exactly. Yes, we're gonna get to that point for sure. I'm gonna copy paste that chat because that's a good, well put thing. Hair Machine. Absolutely. In video games, we want an avatar, generally humanoid, to feel involved. Maybe. I don't know about that. I mean, do you have an avatar in StarCraft? You don't have an avatar in most board games. Well, that's not a video game, I guess. I'm not sure about the avatar concept, but yes, many games do have an avatar. There's something to having an avatar for sure. Physics, the physical world, is super easily understood and conveyed system. Emotion, spirit, other systems exist, but as Jake mentioned, these get reduced to hit points of 0. We don't have a common idea of how these systems work or are represented. I'll address that. I'm going to get to that soon. So is Monopoly violent? Reduce a player's money to 0 in order to remove the actor. Yeah, I think Monopoly is very violent. I think that Monopoly is actually intended to be violent. I think maybe the creators, the original designer of Monopoly designed it to demonstrate how land ownership basically, is violent, is coercive mechanism by which, honestly, like wealth is concentrated. And that, people are like, I think also what Hair Machine's saying is, like, this is probably technically true, but we don't necessarily need to, it might not be as useful to say that Monopoly is violent in that sense. You don't have an avatar in StarCraft, and that's why everyone hates it. That's not why everyone hates it. And plays Mobile X instead. No, that's not true. There's plenty of games that people play that where you don't have an avatar. You don't have an avatar in Civ, really? I mean, I guess you kind of have like a leader, but like, is that an avatar? I mean, it wouldn't be that hard to just like show a picture of Jim Raynor or something in the corner of StarCraft, and then, oh, everyone loves it now. Somewhat less overtly violent would be a decent step without going to the nth degree. Yeah, and again, like, I'm not saying let's not make violent games. I'm like, refer to point number 1. The reason that I object to the violence of Monopoly is not because it's violent, but because of the specific, well, actually, I like Monopoly as a critique. But of course, the version that we know today is a lot less useful in that way. You have many avatars? Yeah, sure. You could say you have many avatars in StarCraft. I think this avatar thing is a little bit shaky. Because like, what is an avatar? You know what I mean? Again, if I put a little Jim Raynor icon in the bottom left-hand corner of the UI in StarCraft, does this now have an avatar? That's who I am. I'm Jim Raynor. I'm commanding the Terran forces. There you go. Boom. So, yeah. So, anyways, I mean, I think there's something to the quality of the avatar. I think it's not nothing. In original CC Command and Conquer, the idea was it was literally you on your computer controlling the army. That's cool. Yeah, Ultimas, the old Ultima games had that concept too, that the avatar was you. In fact, the opening cutscene in Ultima 7, let me see if I can show you guys that. I remember these bird chirps. So first there's this creepy shit. But he's talking to you on your computer. That's what's weird. Yeah, see, look, you'll see.
Avatar, know that Britannia has entered into a new age of enlightenment.
Blah, 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 blah. But then, watch this. What? It's on my computer. What the heck? That guy, that's not Mundane, right? Is that Mundane? It's been a long time. Look, you got the cloth map and everything. It's so meta. See, you guys didn't think that Ultima was cool until just now. And now you're like, holy shit, this is cool. Yeah, Mundane is the evil wizard, I think. What is his name? The fucking red guy. But yeah, see, you find a teleporter behind your house, and you go in it, and that's how you become the avatar. So the avatar is literally you in the story of the game. The Guardian. That's it. Yeah. Anyways. Yeah, on High Score, Richard Garrett. I love that High Score documentary, by the way. Really recommend it. Goes into why he came up with the term avatar to help foster a sense of morality in the games. Yeah. Which is interesting, and you know, he tried to create this whole virtue system to try to stop people from doing what the game otherwise completely tells you to do. What is why you'd never play Ultima? So yeah, I think it's interesting because like this right here, point 3, is what Richard Garriott was like trying to go against, but like everything in the system was, wait, which shit do you hate? I don't know what shit you're referring to. But he was trying to make like a system that would encourage players to like not be murder hobos, basically, even though the whole project is just obviously it's just making murder hobo simulators. And I just recently wrote an article the other day about, you know, what I want to see in RPGs, which is a little bit related to this talk. And I think that what we are largely doing is we're completely just backing off from that project, and we're just making basically visual novels, because we don't know how, like, we know how to write novels. We know how to write text and compose stories that are, you know, that work in a way that we want them to. And I don't think we know how to do that yet with like interactive systems. Myself included. Like I want to make one of these games at some point, but I am quite sure that whatever I end up making will be a murder hobo simulator. Not because I want it to be, but because unless it's like this weird alien thing that no one understands, it's going to have to speak the language. The video? What about the video did you not like? Seemed good to me. You didn't like the... I thought that meta thing is, like, cute. Teleporting in from the real world? What? That's funny. And strange. Why is that bad? Holographic Doll probably likes that. It's like, it reminds me of, I can't remember the name of the comic. Homestuck. It's like that, kind of. It's like, yeah. Okay, so let's move on. Yeah, reskinning a violent game. So yeah, I think, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but to me, this consent thing is a big deal. In fact, the consent thing might be the whole deal. It might be a bigger deal than the removal, because like if I consent to be removed, that's not violent. It really is all about consent or not. I think that's the essence of violence, is acting upon other characters without their consent. Yeah, I don't think it's the removing them from the space. If they convert consent to that, that seems fine. You consent by joining an FPS match. That's an interesting question. I mean, yeah, technically you consent to play any game, but in that moment, yeah, I mean, consent is complicated, I guess, right? Because, you know, can you have conflict with consent? Yeah, that's an interesting question. I'm not sure. I think there is something though about this. I think there is something of the joy of violence is, so yes, we are for sure consenting to enter into this space wherein we will act upon each other without our, like lower level consent, right? Like, because I think there's something to the joy of acting on another creature in an FPS, shooting someone, is that like they didn't want to be shot in that moment. They certainly did not consent to get killed just now, right? I mean, they consented to the whole activity, but they definitely did not consent to be killed. For games to work, you need something to be against, I guess. Like it's a total, unless it's a total toy or something. Yeah. I mean, I guess like you can, maybe this, you can, you need something to be against. Right, but I mean, you could be against like forces. You could be like, against nature, or you could be against like, like a fire. It could be like a firefighting game. And like me putting out the fire does not have agency. It's not a creature. It can't consent. It's not like, you know what I mean? Like there's no way in which it's, you can't say that you're being violent against fire by putting out fire. So that's an example of a conflict where it's not about violating somebody's consent. I do think there's something to actor removal here, but no enemies who are people then. Yeah, I mean, I think that would be probably the purer way to get there. That's how, and now again, this is if you want a non-violent game, which I'm not saying you need. You can have a violent game. Again, we'll go back to point number one, but if you did want a non-violent game, you would have to have, you could have other people as agents who you're competing against, but their consent would have to be part of how you act upon them, I guess. That's all I'm saying. So like, imagine like a Dota like kind of game, and it's mostly about fighting these like I'm trying to think, like you have to like so those minions don't need to be creatures. Those minions could just be like, I don't know, like rocks or something, right? And they're just like rolling rocks, and there's like these, or rivers or something, right? They could just be a force of nature, and honestly, they probably should be, because they don't act like agents, like creatures. So they could just be like balls, like orbs or something, right? So you have these minions, and let's say in this Dota-like game, you can't actually interact with the other players, enemy players, without their consent. there could still be these things where it's like, hey, I want to do this thing. Do you also want to do this thing? And then they agree. And it's like one of those things where you can you have like a temporary alliance kind of thing, very temporary alliance. Thematically, fighting fire is non-violent, but mechanically, you shoot at it and it goes away. Yeah, but shooting is not the thing. That's my point. The issue is not shooting. I mean, like playing darts, for example. You throw a dart, but like, let's say you had a little dart gun, or shoot like a shooting gallery, right? Like you're shooting like archery range or something or whatever. The issue is not the shooting. Theme is 100% why it's non-violent. Mechanically, it's still actor removal. Perhaps we should then recognize that that's why actor removal and hordes of enemies are dehumanizing. Reduces the amount of interaction with other people to the same level as a natural disaster. That's a good way of putting it. I like that. Yeah, it literally dehumanizes. I mean, it objectifies them. It turns them into objects, which is, again, like that's not a bad thing. But I think it depends on like really why are we doing that? The fire doesn't consent. Consent is not a thing with regards to fire. The whole, and that's why, like, honestly, like in this like language of violence, in this like aestheticized violence that we have, the fun is in killing someone or removing someone from play who did not want to be removed from play. Putting out a fire doesn't feel the same way. It doesn't have that same like sick joy of doing something to someone. We don't think of fire as a person, right? Of doing something to someone that they didn't want to have done to them. That's all I'm saying, right? So like in Counter-Strike, if I shoot someone and I kill them, like on some level, I know they did not want to be killed. They certainly did not consent to be killed just now. And yet I killed them. And that is I think that there's a power thing there. There's a rush of like a feeling of power. Because I just did something to you and you didn't want me to do it to you. And I did it to you anyway. And, I mean, there's definitely something very bad in there, I would say. Maybe there's something that's also like sort of fundamental, and maybe there are times with point one that like it can be framed as good, and maybe it even is good, that kind of thing. But I think that's something really to think about, and that just does not activate with fire at all. To me, fire is more like cleaning up if there's like clothes on the floor or something and you're like putting things away. Putting out fire feels like more of like a chore or work or labor. It doesn't feel that same feeling. I always headcanon that the monsters are totally asking for it. I had no choice. They're trying to kill me. It was self-defense. Yeah, and all these games have, not all these games actually, but like many games have some kind of narrative layer that try to yeah, zombies are very bad. I've talked a little bit about zombies before. Maybe that's something to talk about. Because zombies do feel very central in this conversation. What about single-player games, though? Demon sprites controlled by a computer, not other people, are not other people either. That's true, but in the narrative, like diegetically, the demon sprite is supposed to represent somewhat sentient, like a creature, like a living thing. Now the demon, maybe it's like more of an animal. It gets a little mushy, but like let's take about like the Doom, what is it called, like shotgun guy. What, I think that's what his name is. Yeah, this guy. Like this guy is clearly like a man, like, and technically he's like a zombie, I guess, technically speaking, but like it sort of looks like it's just a dude, it sort of looks like just a like human dude with a shotgun, and that's kind of the premise behind zombies. And so I think the crouch mode, you have to think about like not just like, oh, it's a sprite. Like obviously, yeah, oh, it's just like some numbers, some math happening, but like in the world of the narrative, right? Like the diegetic world, what is happening there is that there is a man basically with a shotgun, and you're killing a man more or less. Is it theme that makes something violent, or is it actor removal? I'm not so sure it's the actor removal. I think actor removal is a very common pattern for it, but I think that you could do violent. There could be violence without actor removal, for sure. For example, like I think what it is, it's not actor removal. It's actually like it's it's like consent removal, or like agency removal. It's like dehumanization. Because like I can imagine a game where you just go through the streets and you just like beat the hell out of people and they don't disappear, and maybe they still like can move around and stuff. But I think that would activate in the same way that a game that has actor removal would. Like that would work in the same way. Is it because what you're saying on your text on your screen right now is that a large part is mechanical. Yeah, yeah, mechanical. Well, yeah, it's kind of weird because is this mechanical or is this thematic? Um, I mean, it is mechanical in that there is no consent mechanic. You know what I mean? Like, you just literally click on the guy and it kills him. There's no, like, does he want to be killed? Kind of mechanism. And I'm trying to think, like, but it also is, it's actually both. I guess it's both. And also, I did say a part of it is mechanical. Let me reframe. Let me just rewrite this. Conception or representation. Not ideally. Let's write like the more human like the better for the purposes of violence. And a mechanical ability to act on them without their consent. That's what I would say. That's the essence of violence in games. You can have a game where you go through the streets giving money to homeless people, removing them. Right, exactly, yeah. Or give it like providing housing for homeless people, right? And then they would be removed from the street or wherever they were living before. And yeah, and so that's certainly not violent. And it could be. It could be. Here's a way that just to take this like to the full, to really see this through. Like, it could be that like, there's people who live on the streets and they want to live on the streets. I mean, that's not really how it works. But like, if someone was like, no, I don't want to live in a home, I want to live in a street, and you made them live in a home anyway, then that, technically speaking, that could be maybe, because the thing is, I really do think there's something to this consent thing. I don't know if you guys agree with me at all, but I think that that's what it's about. It's like pushing, forcing someone to do anything that they don't consent to. Here's a thought exercise. Take a single-player shooter and transpose it to multiplayer with each actor being a player. It's violent, yes? Well, isn't this... Oh, now take the give money to the homeless game and make it multiplayer. I'm not sure I follow that line of thinking, that question. Let me catch up on some of these chats. I'm putting up 2 games mechanically identical. Demons versus Fires. Yeah, I mean, demons are, demons get less and less sort of like human. But I think better is zombies. Zombies are a really good example. And they're the most popular thing. Like, everyone wants to shoot a zombie. I have this idea that, like, zombies came to be because of guns and our obsession with guns. They're like, in America anyway. And actually, we've sort of exported it around the world. But like, if you have a gun and you really want to use a gun for its intended purpose, like the perfect thing is a zombie. Like you could not ask for a better thing than a zombie. It kind of looks like a human being. It's completely evil and it can't be reasoned with. It like blows apart. It's just like it almost feels like the answer to gun is zombie. You know what I mean? Like, okay, let's catch up on this chat here. Hello, Ice Gold. I was about to talk about something you said, actually. Zombies are morally unambiguous, right? If you take, all right, so Holographic Doll says, if you take everything that conceivably represents an actor in both games and make it actually an actor, the mechanics of one will inherently mean one has more actor removal. But yeah, but don't you think that the consent is the issue there? It's even good to kill a zombie, right? Exactly, yeah. There's no arguments that could be made about not killing zombies, really. Unless you totally pervert the mechanics of giving money to other actors such that everyone tries to avoid ever having any money. I think no matter what the thing is, if you're doing it to other people, whether those are real people, avatars played by real people, or whether they're, narratively people, and you're doing it to them without their consent, I think that's the spirit of violence. And that's why these like reskins where it's like, no, I'm feeding the animal is not it doesn't do the trick. It tries to like smoke a bomb around it and muddy the waters, but it's basically doing the same thing. And what's so interesting to me is that like, if you think about this and the aesthetics of video games and violence and stuff, like I picture myself playing Patch Quest and, there's like some guns and stuff, and then you get some big gun upgrade, right? And it like does a ton of love points or whatever to the thing. And like the way I would feel when I shoot that enemy and it like does a huge attack, like it does a lot of not damage to them, is the same feeling that I get when I like headshot someone in Counter-Strike or something. Because I think that and the other aspect of this consent thing is domination. Right? I think that's when you act on someone without their consent, even if you do something nice for them, it's still an act of domination. It's still an act of like demonstrating your superiority and your power over that person or that. And even if it's just in the story, it doesn't matter if there's real people involved. Let's see. There's an achievement in Minecraft for throwing some diamonds such that another player automatically picks them up. Wait, there's an achievement in Minecraft for throwing some diamonds such that another player automatically picks them up. Oh, I see. So you like throw them into the other player? I mean, like this like, we can find examples where it's like so small that it would kind of be absurd to call it violent. So like I wouldn't call that violent, in a colloquial sense, but getting technical at like what's the essence of a violent game? Theoretically, I guess that would be. They didn't necessarily ask for the diamonds. They're unambiguously beneficial to have. Well, I mean, sure, I guess, but to me, that's like muddying the waters a little bit. Like, because the spirit of the concept here is just that uh, like why I don't know. That's kind of a weird example, I guess. I ask because we're quickly getting to giving presents is a violation of consent. um, well, I think if you're talking about in real life, social interactions are very, very complicated. And consent is very, very complicated. And I think that uh, something like giving someone a present could be a violation of consent. Absolutely. Like we can all think of examples where it's like the most creepy and violating thing based on what present you gave to who. Absolutely. It could absolutely be a clear violation of consent to give certain people a present in a certain context. But of course, like most of the time, it's not at all. So it's a case by case situation. But in real life, consent is a different animal because in games we hard code like what are the actual mechanisms that we can like even have any kind of like we're miles and miles away I think from just giving presents into when we're talking about like violent games. Like there's no way you can argue that killing someone and making them sit through a 10-second respawn timer isn't a violation of consent on some level, even if they consented to be in the game generally. I'm not sure all competitive games are violent. If you cut someone's railroad off and take it to ride, it's non-violent, but a matter of interacting with the environment versus acting directly on another player. Yeah, I don't think all competitive games are violent. I'm sure I have to think about that. I'm not sure. Again, violence is not my issue even really. I'm just trying to like understand the what's it called? The dynamics and why and what might be bad about games that are very violent in particular ways. I think that the like there are times when you do need to dominate other people in real life. I think it's the right thing to do sometimes. Um, and so I'm not against domination. I'm not against objectification of people. I think we all have to do those things at certain times. It really comes down to like again, why, what's the context, what's the meaning of this, and frankly, in a lot of video games, it's bad stuff. I think it's like colonial, supremacist stuff. Not all mechanics or everything that happens in the game would be sure, but the game itself is at least. Yeah, I don't know. Like I don't know if you would call like a train like a Euro game where you're racing for victory points, like Agricola or something. Like I don't know if you would call that violent. I mean, there are times when you take a resource that someone else wants. I don't think you would call that violent, even technically speaking. Um, yeah, because again, I think that the violence sort of is the and we need both these things. Um, maybe you like. I think that competitive games all require like a hierarchy, like some players are better than others kind of thing. Multiplayer games, at least. I think it would be better for the argument to break things down to type of violence that there are rather than lumping economic, physical, and emotional violence together. Right. Well, emotional violence is at the core of all violence, I think. Like emotional violence, which if I understand what you mean by that, is central to why anyone wants to do violence in these games. Um, is the emotional uh, feelings that they get from doing it. I think, But maybe that's not what you're referring to. Good old non-violent Euro games about some good old-fashioned competition in colonizing some savage continent. Right, exactly. Yeah, like Puerto Rico. It's interesting to think about Puerto Rico because in Puerto Rico, what you're doing is you're like, yeah, you're colonizing, and you're putting these little tokens, these little brown tokens on plantations, uh, and those represent people. I mean, they're just literally little discs, but they are supposed to represent people and workers who you don't pay and who are brown. Um, yeah, it's pretty insane. And then the so I mean that's a good example. Like most people would not consider Puerto Rico a violent game. And maybe violence not the right word. I guess you could say a holographic doll would say that that's like economic violence, maybe. Um, but and I also don't think that Puerto Rico works on this level. Really, it's not really speaking the language of violence so much. It's speaking a language of like colonization and like Western supremacy and stuff like that. But you don't really get in Puerto Rico. You don't so much get that feeling of like domination or acting upon someone without their consent so much. In fact, the interaction in most Euro games is pretty low between players. And you don't really, in my opinion, you don't really think of the workers as people while you're playing. Like when you step back and you look at like what is this theme, it's horrifying. But while you're playing, you're not like, haha, take this worker. You know, like there isn't really that going on there. I think economic and violence in theme is definitely a different beast than the mechanical violence in the game rules. Yeah. Let's talk about some. I thought violence in games was an issue because of how media condemns video game violence as a cause of violence in real life. Nah. Violating someone's freedom from oppression, negative liberty, is not violence in the same sense at all to me. Right. I mean, I agree with that second point. That, like, that, again, and we'll just have, that was the first thing I said, is that it's really about the politics of behind the violence. Like, why are we doing violence? That's ultimately what I care about. But I don't think that. Well, I mean, there were people in the 90s who tried to argue that video game violence caused real life violence. But I haven't heard anyone say that in a long time. Mostly, I just hear people using that as like a straw man to shut down conversations about violence in games. It's like most people who talk about violence in games are not saying that violent video game violence causes real life violence, but that often gets raised by people who are trying to defend video games, and as an easy thing to attack because it is an easy thing to attack. I feel like acting on someone without their consent is to some extent required unless you want your game to have this super solitary feel of a lot of Euro games in multiplayer games. Yeah, and I mean, so like my point of view is like one player is the best, and you know, co-op is another way to achieve that as well, to get around that issue. But yeah, like I've had some amount of skepticism a little bit towards multiplayer competitive games. Because of the fact that like there's gonna be, and yeah, you consent to it up front, but it's kind of like one of those things where you're like, oh yeah, technically I signed the stupid EULA or whatever that says this company can do all kinds of horrible things to me, but you know, it doesn't really affect that lower level consent thing that's going on also. What is some example of a consent mechanic, and why would a player or NPC ever allow a negative thing to be done? This is why I think direct action is more appropriate for definition in games. Well, they might allow a negative thing to be done because you get a better, they would get a better thing later out of it. So, like, they might, you know, it's like an econ play, you know? So, you know, like, so let's say there's some mechanism by which, like, if I get you to agree that we'll both lose 5 points, we'll both gain 15 points, in a few turns. That's something like why someone would consent to something bad in a game. I mean, there are games that have this. There are games where, like trading games, right? There are plenty of competitive games where the trading is a big mechanism. And trading is kind of based around consent. It's interaction with consent, because usually it's like you can't force a trade usually. The player has to agree to a given trade. Now there's other things going on. There's there's coercion and things like that. Yeah. Any competitive game I get monkey brain, beat the guy and don't get beat coming out, and I don't like it. Yeah. No, absolutely. I agree. I'm completely with you on that. 100%. And but that's like the language. That's not just you. I think that's how games are. And a lot of Euro games are kind of close to full consent games, since there just isn't a lot of direct interacting between players. Yeah, I think, but and so what I was trying to say is that like that's what makes them non-violent. Maybe more than the fact that they don't have guns and shooting and all that kind of stuff. You're just acting on non-player entities, right? Which you don't need consent. I don't need consent from this can to pick it up, and you know what I mean. Whereas if this can was a living creature, I would either need its consent or I would be like acting without its consent on it. Okay, let's get to some of these other chats that have. Some of these abstract mechanics, like hit points, are so grandfathered in, almost as violent. Real violence is nothing like that. Yeah. So I wanted to talk about this thing that Steven said a few points on this that I wanted to talk about. Well, then we're back to the computer-controlled demons. No, because the computer-controlled demons in the world, in the narrative, are creatures. That's why it's fun to shoot them. Think in the narrative, in the world, right? You're a Doom guy on this Mars colony or whatever. And if you don't need consent to colonize people in a Euro, then you don't need it to shoot demons. Yeah. I think you're right. You make a good point there. Marcus says, if you don't need consent to colonize people in a Euro, then you don't need to shoot the demons. In the narrative, in the world, they're there, right? And that's true. But the demon, there's also a thing here where the people in Puerto Rico are kind of abstracted out. They're not directly represented. The demon is very clearly and directly represented as like a person who is right near you. And I think that that's part of it too, is, the dehumanization of something that's standing right in front of you. That just makes it more horrifying. Maybe it makes it more horrifying in a way, because it's more of a level of dehumanization. But no, you know what? The thing is, like, it's not, because they start out dehumanized. They start out as an abstraction, right? Like the people in the world of Puerto Rico are an abstraction. Like right when you start, because we're talking about like it's like at a big like Google Earth level abstract layer of looking at reality, right? It's like when you look at the globe, you look at the globe. There's an abstraction there. There's billions of people living on planet Earth, right? And that's not necessarily a horrifying thing to abstract all of these human beings into just a number. I don't think that's horrifying. I think it's okay to say, yeah, there's like however many 8 billion people or whatever living on that ball on the planet Earth, right? That's just an abstraction. There's nothing wrong with that, I think. The process. So the demon represents a process of going from. It's the process of dehumanization that happens in the game, because in Puerto Rico they start out as an abstraction and they stay as an abstraction. In Doom, the demon or the shotgun guy, start as or are represented as there's a person over there, basically. Like there's a human. They're not an abstraction. The demon is not an abstraction. And then you make it into, you abstract it. You turn it into a number. You know what I mean? Like you commodify it, objectify it, and turn it into, uh, you dominate it, you dehumanize it. So that's the thing. Puerto Rico, the setting of Puerto Rico, there's many things in the setting of Puerto Rico that are dehumanizing. The gameplay of Puerto Rico, I don't think is quite as is dehumanizing. Right? Yeah, like what you're doing in Puerto Rico. There's some things I don't know. It's a little messy. We should talk about a game that isn't Puerto Rico, like Agricola. Maybe is a better example because it doesn't have these like really direct colonial themes that make it harder to talk about. Yeah, saying the Earth has 8 billion people isn't dehumanizing because it's not the basis of judgment or interaction, right? Yeah, so I'm trying to like clarify that thought that I had, like Civ or not Civ, like just looking at a globe. Yeah, it's about the process of dehumanization. Is the joy of the game coming through the process of dehumanization? Hey Ryan, how's it going? Oh, thanks. Woo. So yeah, like that's kind of the question. Is the joy of the game coming to the player via a process of dehumanization? That's like the question. And the process of dehumanization needs there to be a represented person or a character, a living thing, something that theoretically could have agency and could consent, and then violating that consent to let me write this down so that because it's kind of hard to start with a person or human, or agent that could consent, violate that consent, I mean, I guess it's that. It's just that, right? Like, thereby, sort of like turning them into a non-human, like an object, like a inanimate object. I think it's fair to say the violence in Puerto Rico is 100% implicit. Yeah, like it's there in the theme because of the historical context, right? And yeah, it's like super valid a critique of Puerto Rico, but it's not actually represented anywhere in the game, right? This process doesn't happen in Puerto Rico, I don't think. I mean, correct me on that, but like the process of dehumanization is the thing. And it requires these 2 steps, I think. Let me know if this makes sense. I'm going to go grab a glass of water real quick. I'll be back in just a minute. All right. I'm back. Boop. Thanks for hanging out, y'all. What are we doing? Puerto Rico is a settler colonial work, so this process is inherently implied to have occurred at some previous point, right? Yeah. Yeah, it certainly happened. How is it meaningful to make these distinctions? Which distinctions? It's thematic violence, it's not the game mechanic of violence. Oh, I see. Yeah. Right. And then when we're talking about a violent game, so that's kind of what basically this is all just like, you know, the whole thing of like I'm not killing people, I'm shooting food at them and then they get happy and disappear. Like and just trying to get at the essence of why that doesn't do it. You know, it doesn't work in my opinion. It still feels like violence. And there's other reasons for that too. Like the idea of shooting something is related to violence. Okay, let's get to these other things. Grandfathered in. Distinctions about what is a violent game and what isn't. Well, that's kind of the concept. That's kind of the topic of the day, you know. But I think there's really good reasons to think about, especially especially point number 4 here. You know, creative stagnation. I'm of the belief, I don't know about you, but like I really think that video games have not advanced as much as I would have liked, and I think that part of this is because of these grandfathered in you know, concepts, mechanisms, ways that games are supposed to exist. All games are violent. Let me think. Can we think of a? Yeah, I don't know if that's real. Let's see. Projecting force. Yeah, projecting force is part of it. What about lesser force, like looking at or talking to people? Yeah, I mean, I guess, you know, no matter what you do, you're always projecting some force, right? Like, I'm projecting force onto this can, which makes it move around. I don't know that projecting force is... I think you definitely couldn't have a game without projecting force of some kind. Even if it's just like changing a number from, you know, one bit to like the next bit. There's some force that you're projecting that's making that happen. So, to balance, it's only the hard, explicit violence of you have a gun and you murder things, which is like, I don't know, 90% of games. Exactly, right. Going off into progressively more abstract cases gets less and less useful. I agree with that totally. And again, my mission here is not removing violent games, getting rid of the idea of violence. So the key is projecting force onto a non-consenting agent. Yeah, I think so. I think that's something, for me, that feels like a useful takeaway from this whole conversation, is that you start with something that like clearly is an agent that could consent to something, and then you sort of like turn them non-human. And like zombies, so like the lie of zombies is that that, you know, they have this bullshit backstory, which is diegetically true, that they, you know, are pure evil monsters who can't be reasoned with, etc., etc., etc. And so, like, okay, well, I guess technically I had to shoot it in the face with a shotgun, point blank. But at the same time, they look human, right? And so on some level, when you see a zombie, you see a human. So zombies are like are like the perfect. I've been thinking about this for since I was like a little kid. I remember being like 10 years old or 12 years old and noticing that in games it was so much more fun to shoot people than it was to shoot like weird monsters or inanimate objects. And I was like, why is that? Like, what's the deal with that? And this is it. This is why I'm saying direct action is better than consent. The trading element is covered by this also because it's not direct, it's brokered. Direct action? I'm not sure I follow. What do you mean by direct action? Is better term than consent? In the Water 88, can you like elaborate on that last thing that you said? Because it sounds interesting, but I'm not sure I understand. This whole thing about trading elements covered because it's not direct, it's brokered. Yeah, zombies are basically a permission structure to do dehumanization. Excuse to do dehumanization. That's what they are. And that's why I don't like them. Zombies sell your game to alt-right chuds. Yeah, I mean that I don't think that's even fair. I think that the appeal of zombies is everywhere. Like everybody loves zombies, you know. Like I don't think it's just like alt-right people. I think because you know it's kind of like it plays into like classical, you know, good and evil fantasies, you know. It's like it used to be a dragon, you know. Now it's so I think it's I don't want to use the word universal, but I think it's like very widely appreciated, unfortunately. But also I get the spirit of what you said, and I think it's true on a level also. So Marcus, the crouch mode says that it might be a me thing, that it's more fun to shoot human-like in an FPS, let's say, right? In an FPS. Who here thinks that it's more fun to shoot at human or human-like creatures than it is like a Keiko demon from Doom, if you know what that looks like? Like this guy. So is it more fun to shoot at like, or we can actually even look at like a Revenant. More fun to shoot this guy or the big circle guy, you know? Here, we can open them both up. But actually the shotgun guy is a much better example. Yeah, this is a good example. Is it more fun to shoot this guy or the big balloon? And be honest. Don't say no joke answers. No jokes allowed in this moment. Of course, the demon is more fun. I'm just asking, like, which is more satisfying to shoot at? Oh, getting nothing but joke answers. I knew this was a bad idea. Like I don't want to shoot humans, obviously. Like that's not where I'm coming from. I don't know though. I don't think it's just you. My brother said the same thing once, but I don't know if I feel it exactly. You're already non-human, and I agree that like if you're saying that there is like a slight discomfort in shooting the human character, I think that's true too. The already non-human enemies make it much more comfortable to do what would dehumanize human. Right, exactly. Yeah, there is a discomfort element there, and maybe that does vary with person to person. rather shoot Nazis than demons sometimes. Right, exactly. Yeah, well, I don't know if that helps. The shoot rather not shoot Nazis than humans any day. Trying to use the Nazi. Yeah. You can't assume people have different opinions that you are joking. No, yeah. That's true. Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how much of that is a subjective thing. Um, because I mean, to me, like there are patterns in how people make games and sell games and market games. And to me, it seems like my theory that people enjoy shooting people more than they enjoy shooting non-people is supported by like the market research. You know, like there's not a lot of games about shooting weird slimes. You know, like that's just I really think that that's not as much fun as shooting people. And there's a reason for that, and this is that reason. And the people could be zombies, they could be whatever, but they're people. They could be Nazis. But the important thing is that they kind of look like a person. Do you think it helps to expand out from shooting fighting to fighting? I mean, I think the difference, one difference between shooting and fighting with regards to what we're talking about now is that shooting is more of a like, it's a higher amount of force that you can put on another person at one time, right? Like, especially if it's like kind of realistic where it's like one shot kills. You're like, you're doing like the ultimate thing you can do to a person, kill them without their consent in the blink of an eye, right? That's like the essence of a gun. It has like this like godlike power. Whereas like fighting, if it's like Street Fighter or something, it's like you can punch someone, you know, and that all does have that dynamic, but it's just like lesser, I guess. There is a reason for it, but I think there's a different one. What's in that it's kind of fun to be fighting against something that can do roughly the same things as you can do. I don't know. That's a weird theory because I thought like the whole idea was like people liked asymmetry. Right? Like people love asymmetrical stuff, I thought. It's actually least fun to be playing against things that are the same as you. But I guess maybe you're talking about like a power thing. Like just knowing that like they're playing by the same rules I am. Kind of. People love many different things. People play the same shooter with literally different themed enemies. You punch them, they punch you back. It's almost like consent. Well, yeah, I mean, entering into any of those kind of things, there is a consent thing there. All right, I'm kind of running out of time, so I want to get to these things. This topic real quick. I think that the consent thing is complicated and interesting, and I you know, to me, there's something useful in there, but people like asymmetry, but there's a difference between I shoot fireballs, you shoot lightning, and I am human, you are Cthulhu. Oh, that's just more asymmetry, isn't it? I mean, it sounds cool to me. I'd love to see human versus Cthulhu. It sounds great. But yeah, I think Marcus is correct. I think that there is something to that also. I think that yeah, like there's something about like oh, it's two forces of humans. Like I think there's you know, the nice thing about humans is like you kind of like you know what humans are capable of. Like if it was some weird abstract slime character, I'm like, can he like slip under doors? Can he like go through the cracks of the walls? You know, like what does it even gonna hurt a slime if I shoot at it? Whereas a human, I know if I shoot him, he's going to get hurt, right? Like, because I know what being a human is like. I know that he has to open doors to get through them, things like that, right? So there's a lot of like good affordances to humans because we are humans. And I think that's part of it too, for sure. But the thing is like, it's not like we're just making like a bunch of humans and humans games. We're making a bunch of humans and humans at war games. And humans shooting zombies, which are like, are zombies really, or like demons that look like humans, like that shotgun guy, are those really the same in that sense? Like, I don't know. I think that it's, I think we're both right. People want to believe that their game is fair, but in reality, they want it to privilege them. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think that's, well, yeah, it's, that's maybe another conversation. All right, so let's do this for real. This one, I don't know. I can't really give a good answer to this guy right now, I think. I mean, it's just, yeah, I'm going to skip this one for now. Pass for now on this one. But I want to talk about the thing that Steven talked about. Okay, yeah, let's write that down. Herbivore. I'm gonna write that down in the thing. For out of time, I probably shouldn't start bringing up humanoids. Then it's more fun to shoot Asari or personas than monsters. Can you say a little bit more about that? I'd like to hear about that. I'm just gonna throw this in here somewhere. Boom. And the Jennifer Shirley thing. I don't know how you say her last name. But yeah, I agree. Robots are less. See, that's the thing. Robots are automatically less fun to shoot because, like, robots are less consenty, less people-y. It being humans that we're shooting at, yes, or people, or they don't have to be literally humans, but like, you know, they have to appear kind of human, and they have to flag this part of our brain that says like that's like an agent that could consent to something, and I am stealing their consent, and that's where that rush of power and that feeling of domination comes through. That's what's important. It doesn't matter whether they're technically human or not. So like a robot that looked completely human would probably do it. But the more they're like a human, the more you get that feeling. Okay, let's say. I think interestingly, a lot of multiplayer games there are actually people that do intentionally stack the deck against themselves. Like in CCGs, people play bad decks knowing that they're bad, or in a fighting game, people play bad characters. I don't like the structure you're setting up where fun comes from denying or violating consent. Like, I think you're right that that's fun for some folks, but I hate it. Well, yeah, and I think yeah, you're right. I think there's some people out there who do hate that, and I also kind of hate it. So it's more fun to shoot Cortana than a robot from Fallout. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I mean, I definitely hate that. This is something I am criticizing. And I think it's part of this language of violence that video games have been relying on. But I grew up in it, you know, and I learned my aesthetic preferences in this world. And so, you know, like I'm playing Wasteland 3 right now, and it's just like constant fighting. It's just like a fighting D&D game. We're just like shooting shit all the time, and there's no option to not shoot shit all the time. But like, you know, I would be lying if I didn't say I got satisfaction out of like, you know, headshotting these evil, crazy, bad people. In that game, it's not even zombies. It's just people who are just bad, and there's no way to not fight them. Same with Outer Worlds has the same thing. It's got these marauders who are just like, you can't talk to them, you can't reason with them, and they're basically zombies. And yeah. I enjoy games about projecting force, but I don't think games about projecting force are the best games we could be making. Absolutely agreed. I say as I make one. I'm also making one. I'm making a war game. And the way I think about it is that like this is the language, and I think that will take time, and I think some people, you know, everyone's got to kind of make their own art and based on the person that they are, and sort of try to rationalize and work around, not rationalize, but maybe a little bit rationalize, but they have to also acknowledge. I think that's kind of what it comes down to, is being able to acknowledge, like, yeah, this is a thing that's a quality of these games, and I don't like this aspect of them, and I want to try to find ways to make that better, and I want to see a future where that's not the language. All right, so quickly, I keep saying I'm going to do this. Violence is easier to simulate, isn't just a made-up false lie. It's easier to model stuff that is about the position of objects in space. So just another big point I wanted to make. Let's see. Let's put this here. Violence is easier for games to do. This is, in my opinion, a made-up false lie. Marcus says, for real-time continuous space avatar piloting games, I definitely think a computer modeling argument holds. Well, let me give my argument really quick and just make sure I can say it. We have this idea that violent interactions are easier to do than non-violent ones in video games. I think that any interactions can be abstracted into very simple numeric or spatial representations / rule sets, but that and we're simply more forgiving of the stupidness when it comes to violent rule sets. Because it's sort of baked in, normalized. We sort of see. That's kind of my argument. So like when there's like a dating app or game or whatever, not dating app, but like a dating sim type of thing, and it has like, you know, you gain heart points or whatever, we're just like, that's dumb. But it's like, so is the shooting and hit points and stuff. It's like, we just are not as critical about that. So Steven said, this. So you can model them on a very simple level and you get good results. Do you? Like, I mean, that's a big, that's the thing that has to be demonstrated to me. Because yeah, they work, but so do like dating sims. So do all kinds of things. I mean, I don't know that I would call The Sims, which is not really violent, good, but I also wouldn't call Call of Duty good either. So I think that's kind of my take on this. Anything that's black and white is easier to model. Yeah, but is violence in real life black and white? I don't think it is. I think that we simplify with violence too. Now, it may be, let me write an addendum here. It may be that in real life, violence is generally less complex than non-violent interactions. Let's write this a different way. Like, how do I put it? Like, so let's say violent interactions are 50 complexity points, complex, and non-violent ones are however high you want. Let's say 1,000 complexity points complex. Okay, so let's just grant that. I don't think that's true, but let's grant that, like, in real life, the non-violent interactions, so, like, you know, I don't know what it's. I mean, plenty of non-violent interactions are super simple, like stacking crates and shit, but I assume people are talking about interpersonal things. So, like, you know, dating, right? Like, actually dating someone. Let's say that's, you know, 20 times as complex, or 100, however many, whatever. My point is that video games are representing things at at around like 5 complexity points. So it doesn't really matter. You know what I'm saying? Like, there's more headroom maybe on one than the other, but like our games are so simple and so abstracted, so not complex, that this extra 950 complexity points or whatever doesn't even register. It doesn't even matter. Because we're operating at like super abstracted levels, whether it's in the violence or in the what's it called, nonviolent interactions. We still haven't figured out how to make a detective game that has emergent crime solving gameplay. There's a good point to be made about how games go out of their way to narratively simplify violence even further by dehumanizing your targets. Yeah, exactly. I mean, yeah. People... Right, I mean, like, real life... If we're talking about, like, real life violence, there's all kinds of shit going on there that just gets completely abstracted away, but people don't even think about that. Like, what it's funny because, like, there's actually a kind of like a Mott and Bailey sort of thing going on here, because, like, what people pretend that violence in games is basically like billiards or pool or something. Like, it's just this simple, it's just like balls bouncing around, you know? And it's not. Like, that's not why people play these games. People don't play these games because, like, oh, physics angles and shit. No, like, that's not what's going on in those games. What we're doing is we are hyper abstracting these dynamics of, like, bad guy. There's a bad guy there. Uh-oh. Shoot the bad guy. And there's all kinds of stuff that's collapsing down. And we just take it for granted. And it's just as absurd as, you know, any dating game abstraction. There are also platformers and car driving. But the overall focus is clearly physics. Well, like, turn-based games don't usually have physics, unfortunately. I mean, I guess they have some kind of physics. There are no turn-based games. Ah. Didn't know that. I would say if we counted the number of games that involved fighting and the number of games that didn't, it wouldn't even be a close contest. Anyway, the physics thing. Physics is like a simple system, but physics is not the same thing as violence, right? So, like, yeah, we have car racing games, platformers, certain sport games that use physics. Physics. Yeah. Yeah. Like, physics is something that can be, like, modeled in a simple way, but I think it's just important to realize that physics is not violence. And violence is not physics. I mean, you can do violence. There are turn-based games, actually, and a lot of them, like XCOM or something, has no physics and has plenty of violence. And you get that same violent rush from shooting someone in an XCOM. There's a sort of detachment from our understanding of physics and morals. If physics are wrong, we feel a strong reaction. All right. I think I'm about to wrap up. We went a little long today, but this was a good one. If you guys have any more thoughts about this topic, send them to the Discord, of course. We'll be there. I'll post this on YouTube later. But yeah, this was most of the stuff I have to say on violence. And even if you think mostly what I said was wrong and possibly stupid, maybe it got your brain moving in a certain direction that could be helpful. So yeah, thanks for watching and hanging out, and I will see you next Monday, if not before. I'll probably stream again before then. But thanks for hanging out. See ya.